Well, hello and welcome to the latest in the Deckhive Introduces webinar series. We've done a number of these now, and we hope that they're a useful resource to get to know a bit more about the decks in the Deckhive library. And today I'm delighted that we're joined by Lucy Ryan and her partner Steve Clark, who is also lurking in the background, so you may see Steve pop up a bit later. But Lucy is a creator of Mindspring as a business and of several decks of cards that are in the Deckhive library, actually. But we're starting with our focus on the strengths cards today. So thank you, Lucy, for joining us. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. Well, it's really, really good for you to take your time to kind of share with us about the story. So what we'd like to do over the next 45 minutes or so is to get a bit of an understanding about your story. How did you come up with the idea of having some strengths cards, and then how did you go about creating them, and why? And then if we can make sure by the end we're able to kind of focus a little bit on some practicalities around what can we do with them and how can we use them maybe in the Deckhive kind of context. So in terms of kicking us off, maybe if you could just share a bit more about, or something about your background and how you came to be where you are today.
Okay, sure. And hello, particularly to some some old delegates like Ben in Adelaide. How cool to see you. So, I mean, given that we're talking about strengths, let me introduce myself from a strengths perspective then, Martin. Four top strengths. Number one, love of learning. And that just goes through, kind of weaves through, particularly the last 15 years. So my MSc was in applied positive psychology, hence the strengths. We'll talk about that. And then more recently, over the last 5 years, I did a part-time PhD specializing in women in leadership and midlife. Love of people. So for the last 20 years, I've been training and coaching and running Mindspring for the last 18 years now. And then curiosity and creativity are my other two top strengths. Which can sometimes get a bit overwhelming with development of ideas and products, and wrote a book in lockdown on leadership that comes out in October. So those are my top four strengths.
That's a lovely way to do the introduction. And do you find it, is that something you use often in your workshops, to introduce yourself and ask other people to introduce themselves in that way?
Yeah, very much so. And also the other thing is that I help people do that as their, the intro to a CV, or when people are asked for a biog. A really easy way to do it is actually to start with your strengths and weave that into either your introduction, your biog, your CV review. So yeah,
excellent. That's really nice. So if we talk about the strengths cards themselves then, because that's a number of years ago now, isn't it, that you created them? 10 years, wow. So, and they were some of the first strengths cards in the world, weren't they?
They were. I think I'm right in saying they were the first, but I'm sure someone will challenge me on that. But yeah, they've been reprinted 10 times. Excellent. And the ones you'll have a look at a moment is the brand new version.
Excellent.
So okay, it's been beautiful.
Well, what I'll do is I'll share my screen so that we can see some of the cards as you're just talking us through kind of what they are and how they came to be. So what's the story of the strengths cards?
Well, as we just said, they were created 10 years ago. So I was doing my master's in applied positive psychology. And as part of that, you look at positive psychology 24 character strengths, which sit under 6 virtues of wisdom, transcendence, courage, justice, that tests me now, humanity, and temperance. And then we've got the 24 character strengths, which you can see on the screen now. I wasn't too fond of the questionnaire, although it is freely available, and that's really important. There's few strength psychometrics out there that are freely available at via strengths.org. And I wanted a more kinesthetic way of working with clients. I wanted them to explore the strengths. I wanted to look at them in a visual way, not all of us like just a written questionnaire. So I wanted people to have more fun with it, actually. and to move them around and everything. Then came the pandemic, and we were no longer sitting with clients, playing with them face to face, but I wanted to get the same spirit of it in a digital format. And then, of course, Martin, you magically came along with Deckhive too.
Yes, and yeah, and to have your cards as part of the library is fantastic for us, and because they're lovely. It's sort of got that lovely sort of visual element, haven't they? So we can see some of the pictures here from the picture side of the cards. And I love this creativity one. That's my favorite image. I'm always very drawn to that. But yeah, so they're sort of very striking, but then there's kind of more to it than that, isn't there? So if I turn over some of the cards and show the other side.
On the other side is a description of them. And I mean, it tells you immediately something about someone, the way they play with them. So some people will go, God, I hate the pictures, or they draw me too unnaturally to a strength, and they'll turn them, they'll just flip them all over. So it's just words. And then some people will just forget there's any words and just play with the pictures. So it tells you something about someone immediately anyway, but it gives you that nice change of whether you're visual or whether you are more words oriented, linguistic.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, isn't it? It works on several levels at that sense in terms of how people engage with it as a tool. But
definitely.
Yeah, so and do you want to say anything more about kind of your concerns about the kind of this questionnaire type approaches? And so what does this give you that's different to that, really?
I think that whenever you do a questionnaire, obviously the responses are always contextual to the moment when you filled them in. And also the way the words are written really draw you. So for instance, let's take the strength of appreciation of beauty and excellence. The questionnaire draws you to whether you go to museums, whether you explore art every day. And it's very commonly on the questionnaire, everyone's very lowest strength, or in the last bottom three. Yet what it's really talking about is that ability, particularly in the workplace, to really notice skilled performance and to really be in awe of that, which so many leaders are, but they'd never choose this. I think some people find it almost a kind of, I'm not artistic, and they just drop it. Yeah. Whereas I've seen people be really joyful about other people's success. So what I've found is that it brings out something else entirely different. Plus, of course, it allows people to be more playful. You can go, oh, I quite like that. I don't like that. I'm feeling that today. That's been like a river running through my life. So it allows people to just be less fixed, as if a questionnaire is going to fix us in our strengths forever. Yeah. I just don't believe that. I think we are much more flexible as human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And then but at the same time, this is rooted in the VIA strengths framework.
He's absolutely right. So the other thing is, I always wanted to work with evidence-based science. And the 24 character strengths are rooted in, well, they were created by Martin Seligman and Chris Peterson, who spent years looking at historical, psychological, scientific, philosophical underpinnings of character strengths and came up with these 24. And they challenged people to find more that weren't within the 24. They were quite open to that, but yet they haven't actually been added to. Yeah. And I really love them. Obviously I've worked with them for a decade. And I think that the challenge sometimes is, well, where does love, where does kindness fit in the workplace? Which of course it does. You know, who said that these aren't elements of us being at work? So they're rooted in very good science.
Yeah, fab. So you've got that a good blend then of the freedom, that routing, but the freedom to kind of take it in different directions where the individual and the group wants to go.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm curious about the pictures as well then, because they're such an important part, aren't they, of that experience. So where did you discover these fabulous pictures from?
Oh, well, I mean, I spent way too many hours looking for the pictures, but actually I also asked around lots of people. My daughters were very instrumental in them. I had a couple of designers looking at them, so a lot of people had input. And there were quite a few comments in our original pack that they were a bit gendered, which worried me. So I tried to make it as balanced as I possibly could.
Yeah. So, and you said this is the latest version that we're looking at here on the screen. So has much changed from the earlier versions that many of us here may have seen?
Well, the vast majority of pictures are different, just because I felt after 10 years they deserved a freshen up. And you know, I love the look of these ones.
There's an energy, isn't it?
Too.
Yeah, there's kind of an energy and vitality to the pictures.
I'm glad you feel that. That's good.
Yeah, so I'm just scrolling through the deck. So I'll say a bit more about Deckhive a bit later on, but for those of you who haven't seen it before, you can simply scroll through the whole deck of cards like this, and then just drag over to the side onto the table the ones that you want to select. So it's really easy to use. So there are 24 cards in the pack, aren't there, to match the 24 strengths in the framework. So that's the whole lot you've just seen there, and of course you can flip over the whole lot if you wanted to read. I mean, the nature of these cards, because there's a fair bit of text on them, generally I think you need to zoom in or enlarge the cards to be able to read them on screen.
Yeah, I think so. It's easy enough to do.
It is, yeah, and you can still make a selection. Often people would often choose them based on the heading, wouldn't they, to look at in a bit more detail about.
Yeah, I think the vast majority of people, Martin, choose them on the visual and then enlarge them, flip them over, read more, and then they either go, yeah, no, put it back, try another.
Yeah, fab. So back in the day then, when you were kind of coming up with hatching this plan to create some strengths cards, what were you imagining would be done with them?
Well, my dissertation was in coaching with positive psychology. So I was imagining that they would be used by coaches, and any products that we've ever designed, Steve and I, literally come from practice. You know, Ben, who's there, might remember back in the days of RAC playing with things like this. So it started from, does this work for my clients? If it works for my clients, it'll work for others. So I always imagined there'd be for coaches, managers, and teachers, because I was doing quite a lot of work with teachers working with obviously their teenagers.
Okay, so the older kind of children.
Yeah, certainly group. About around about 14 years plus.
Okay, so then, and has that kind of panned out to be the case in the way that they've often been used, or have you had some surprises in the way that people have used the cards?
Well, but by and large, yes, they've been used by coaches, managers, leaders, teachers. I think the surprises lies more in not only how they've been used, but the joy in how they're being used, if I'm honest. So not only do they bring a huge energy to the room, for any of you who've played with them before, they bring a huge energy and discussion to the room. But I always remember one of the first times, I was quite nervous, by the way, of using these with very senior board directors. I felt like they would chuck out some of the words and language here, and that they would want to work with business strengths, strategy, innovation, and that they would chuck out words of you know, the love and forgiveness and kindness. And I was working with a board, and they were giving each other strengths feedback. They were choosing a card for each other. And the CEO cancelled all meetings for 2 hours and said it was the most valuable, beautiful, interesting 2 hours he'd ever spent with his colleagues.
Wow.
And I just remember then thinking, oh, that was my problem with those words. This wasn't the business world problem. This is gonna be fantastic. And probably the second biggest surprise is, of course, my children. I have two children aged now 24 and 25, and they'd always gone, oh, for God's sake, shut up with your psychological stuff. And they both went to university, and there were the strengths cards up on their wardrobes, and it was like, oh, it's worked.
Oh, you've arrived.
I've arrived. And Steve was reminding me earlier of one of our clients in Belfast, where they used to give everyone a strength of the, not everyone, one person a strength of the week. And that people were really excited to receive that strength of the week and so proud that it had been noticed. So it was the creativity that people were using within them that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? To kind of, and it's lovely that people have, well, you've experienced that firsthand, but also sometimes you hear from other people, don't you?
Yeah.
Kind of after the event when it's kind of had a particularly big impact on something. And there was another story I think you mentioned about, that was a very personal story about somebody who kind of had, well, maybe some of those meaningful kind of ways you could imagine.
Yeah, there was. I wept when I received her email. Her sister was dying of cancer, and they had no more words left to say to each other. So they did it through the medium of strengths cards and what they'd always valued about each other. And it was so beautiful. And she just was saying, thank you for giving us a mode of expression.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was really beautiful.
Yeah. And I sometimes wonder, how many more of those kind of stories there might be that you never hear about, because it takes a lot of effort, doesn't it, to kind of get in touch with somebody and to share kind of how you've used something, because everyone's busy, and it doesn't mean that they're not sort of having that impact kind of many times over. And sometimes it's just a chance happening that you find out. So it's really lovely when people take that time.
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree.
So I guess it would be good to kind of maybe talk through some examples about how you've used the cards. Is it, or is there anything else you want to say before we kind of look at that?
Happy to kind of get practical with it, if that helps everyone. I did mean to say, by the way, if people wanted to ask questions as we went through, they are welcome. I'll kind of manage our time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a good idea. So yeah, feel free to kind of put things in the chat, and then we can pick up on things as we go through. But if we kind of, I'll kind of move things around on screen, I guess, so we can sort of see kind of a representation of what you're going to talk through. But in terms of examples, kind of where would you like to start?
Well, the ways I work with them, let's start with that. And then what I thought I'd do is walk you through a kind of client and the ways we've worked together with them.
Fabulous.
The way I work with them, so I use them on every single first coaching session as a getting to know you. I don't think there's a client where I haven't done that. Then we also use them at transition points. We use them with problem solving. We use them for team dynamics and for positive appreciation, and also difficult feedback. What strength do you need to dial up more? So there's a lot of different ways that certainly that I use them. And what I'd recommend with people, if they want to use them, is they do it in 3 stages, if you like. Start with yourself first and just play and explore. What are your top strengths? What are the lowest? What ones do you need to dial up or down? So I'll use that language quite a lot of dialing up and dialing down. Then use them to understand others. Start working with individuals and just start using some of the examples I'll walk you through in a moment. And then also you can use them to improve team dynamics. So both, I'd always start with positive appreciation. Get a team to all choose each other for strength. And then if you can also move that on to getting a team to choose a strength that they'd like people to see more of. So you can use it for feedback and positive appreciation. So those are the 3 stages I'd work through. but let's work through a client. That seems to be a good idea, doesn't it?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay.
So yeah, so do you want to kind of talk us through kind of the scenario?
Yeah,
Then what was the situation?
Sure. So this is Miranda, who is a leader in the NHS. She's got a big team, and we were doing some exec coaching. And as I said, starting off, first session is always exploring the top strengths. So you can see here, and I've put, or you've done it for me there, Martin, put a sticky note there. You can use the sticky notes. So you have the strengths cards one side. She picked these 5 across after lots of discussion. So we've got their kindness, teamwork, leadership, fairness, and integrity. Now, the first stage here is you have actually a really in-depth conversation. It's fun, it's energizing. It's all about, how do you use these? How do they serve you as a leader? How does it show up? Would others agree with this? Which is always nice. You'll find that loads of clients will take the deck home, or they'll get them to have a look at it online and get their partners to add into that. But how do these 5, I always talk about, as kind of run like a river through your life. Where do they show up? How do they show up? The second thing then we'd look up is, how do you expand them and use them in different ways? Often what happens with our top strengths is we get very habitual. So it's a bit like my love of learning. I'm always using it in writing these days. But what about expanding that in different ways? Learning something. I'm really wanting to learn about history of art for some reason at the moment. So we actually expand our top strengths rather than get habitual. And that's what we started to look at. After we've done that, the next thing to often look at is, where do those top strengths cluster? Now, here goes. When we're talking about top strengths, what happens with them is that everyone gets locked on those top 5 strengths. Now, personally, that really worries me, because you've got a choice of 19 others that kind of get shoved to one side, which seems like a real waste. But the other thing is that those 5 get overdone. So they start to disserve you rather than serve you. So the next stage is to look at clusters. So our strengths, top strengths, cluster together. They get very sticky and they cluster together. That works for good and bad. So Miranda chose 2 clusters in her top strengths. What she was saying is, I look at this, was that kindness, teamwork, and leadership worked as a cluster. And actually fairness and integrity worked as a cluster. Now, the stage that we're looking at then is, well, what happens with that cluster? Where does it serve you? And where does it disserve you? So what Miranda was saying is that kindness, leadership, teamwork is absolutely her ball game. She loves leading a team. They enjoy being led by her. She doesn't feel good about herself unless she actually has a team that she can work with. Where it disserves her, Martin, is that Miranda can get very protective of the team and also promote the team before herself. So her brand is quite low whilst she is busy promoting the team. But more importantly is, she absolutely doesn't like having difficult conversations with them. It really cuts across that strength of kindness. So they serve and disserve her. And if you talk about fairness, integrity, 2 beautiful strengths clustered together, at worst can sometimes become quite black and white thinking. I'm right, you're wrong. So those are the kind of flavour of discussions we were having about clusters. And then what we were talking about, you know, I was talking about that language of dialing up, is what strengths are worth dialing up that would stop those ones working against her. So we were talking about dialing up courage with that first cluster. So she very much brought the strength of courage into that mix. And it was all about courage to have difficult conversations, courage to not necessarily be liked as a leader, courage to use kindness in a different way. And then with the other cluster, it was about curiosity. So rather than getting just black and white thinking, it was about asking better questions. Why was someone thinking like that? What were the reasons? How could she support them? And that's what we were working on, certainly in kind of sessions 2 and 3 together.
So were you also drawing, when you're bringing those things in, are you drawing on previous times that she's demonstrated courage and curiosity as well to kind of help her to recognize that they are strengths that she could put in?
Yeah, I mean, everyone will have used all 24 strengths at some points in their lives. And I think we forget that. They're not gone. We just sometimes struggle to dial them up. It's like forgiveness is quite low for me, which I probably shouldn't confess to. Well, it's not that I don't have it. It's that sometimes I just need to crank it up a bit and bring it into the mix. So of course she has courage and curiosity. And the other thing that's useful to remember is in what other areas of her life does she use them? So therefore, how can she bring them into her role as a leader? So we've got all 24. We just don't have all 24 in equal measure. So it's about recognizing when we do have them, when we have used them in the past, when we've used them in other ways, and dialing them up.
And I think you also had an example around problem solving and resilience. So was that kind of with the same person, or was that somebody else?
Definitely. But it's actually a conversation I've been having over the last year, hugely with clients. You know, obviously resilience has been such a big theme over the last year, hasn't it? And Miranda in particular, working in the NHS, she's faced loads of change. There's a hybrid working model. She's exhausted a lot of the time and brings those kind of issues to coaching. And we started to talk about these 3 strengths. One of the things it's worth saying, by the way, is I don't think any product or cards is the answer. What I see them as is as a catalyst to a better conversation. So although our conversations about resilience kind of pinged off in lots of different directions, this starting point of choosing what strengths might be useful to pull on acts as such a beautiful catalyst to a much bigger conversation and maybe different models and different things to do. But we were talking about these 3 strengths, kindness, which is obviously one of her top strengths, but using it a different way, which is self-kindness. So we were talking about putting different boundaries in, and healthy boundaries just to protect her time, because she's a giver. So that's self-kindness. We were talking about vitality, not the more expending more energy because she's exhausted, but vitality again in a different way. And for her, it was mindfulness, which she's just started some online classes in. So bringing some calm, which has enabled the growth of perspective. So what I found is that we had some really beautiful conversations about resilience, but the using the deck enabled us to just do it in a different way. And brought a kind of calmness to it, to the discussions about resilience.
Mm. So even though you would have started your coaching relationship with the strengths activity, then you very often will go back to it as a catalyst for those conversations.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Not every conversation, but they're often a reminder. They sit there sometimes in the background. I've got lots of clients who create a wall of them, and they either have it as a virtual wall or they have it as a wall here. So they're there quite present in our coaching discussions as we go through. So they might not be in every coaching session, but they're always there as a backdrop is the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, so you have that sort of shared language that you can work with.
Yeah, it's a really great way of putting it. It enables us to share that language. And, you know, if, for instance, we're talking about someone's resilience and exhaustion, we can talk about vitality, using vitality in a different way, or vitality overdone. And as I was saying, this language of, you know, maybe that's been just dialed up just too much. How do we dial that down, and how do we bring balance through a different strength? Mm. So I'm always looking at kind of balancing that seesaw.
Yeah, but always from that sort of appreciative and positively oriented language, because you're talking about strengths, even in those moments when you're talking about bringing things up or countering a deficit in some way, then you're framing that in a very positive way, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the exercises. I'm always reminding people that a weakness is only an overdone strength. So my fabulous weakness of procrastination, which I've got to say I am exceptional about, and it's probably the only time I become passionate about cleaning, is when I'm procrastinating. And but that procrastination is really kind of curiosity overdone. And it's just, I kind of don't know when to stop being curious and to exercise self-control and get down to something. So although you're, exactly as you said, you're talking about a deficit, if you're talking about weaknesses with someone, when you start from a position of strength and go, okay, well, let's talk about what strengths are being overdone, you'll have a much richer, better quality conversation as a result.
Mm. Yeah, because people want to approach that conversation, don't they? I think there's something that's more inviting about that. We've had so many conversations, haven't we, in the past, when we just focus on what we need to do better. And you feel like you're being bashed over the head, or you're bashing yourself over the head. Yeah. And it's kind of nice to have that different frame.
Yeah, and I've had clients use strengths and strengths cards as the starting point of their appraisals now. So you'll know with appraisals, sometimes you've got a 60-minute appraisal, 10 minutes on what you do well and 50 minutes on what you really need to do better. And I've had clients who do really great strengths-based appraisals of, you know, what do you seriously do well? And how have you used it? And how do we expand them more? And then what can we dial up for the coming 6 months? And it's a much more productive appraisal, rather than feeling you've been bashed over the head, where you feel like you've been working really hard for a year, but feel bashed over the head because you haven't done well enough.
Mm. And are those people typically using the cards as a stimulus for those kind of conversations in appraisals, or are they doing that in a different way?
They're either using, they're either just asking strengths-based questions, or they're using cards, or they're using the Via Strengths questionnaire. I've just seen Adrienne's question. Shall I just answer that, Martin? Is that a good
time? Yeah, well, let me just repeat it for anyone who's kind of watching back on the replay who can't see the chat. So the question is, do our top strengths change over time? And if I did the Via questionnaire a few months ago, should I ignore this and just choose the cards from a fresh perspective?
Okay, so Adrienne, Scientists will say, bye Claire, glad you find it useful. Scientists will say that our top strengths don't change much over time, although there is some other scientists who will, you know, give a different perspective, Adrienne. I'm of the school that says things change over time. I believe we are way more flexible and plastic. Our brains have more plasticity than we have been working with over the last kind of certainly 2 decades. So not only do I think our strengths change over time, but I also think that with different contexts, we have to dial up some different strengths. That doesn't mean to say that you won't have some that have stayed with you for life. I think I've been a learner most of my life, but I didn't know it until I was about 40. I kind of thought it was there, but over, you know, I left school with barely a qualification and had been told that I wasn't one, but I always kind of thought it was there. So yes, they change over time. Yes, they change with context, but you might have some top strengths that have run like a thread through your life. If you did the VIA questionnaire a few months ago, definitely don't ignore it. Do it again. Who knows what context you were in when you did it? So have a go at doing it again, and see if the cards give you a fresh perspective. What a lot of people find is that they do get a fresh perspective using the cards because they can be more thoughtful in a different way. They're not answering questionnaires. They can really look at it and think about it. Plus, I'd ask people. I'd share these cards with other people. I'd share the digits, much easier digitally, to ask people to choose them for you. So have a go with it and see what you end up with.
And on that point, you said earlier about kind of using that opportunity to the activity where you share team appreciation. So can you just say a bit about how you tend to set that up and kind of any caveats around when you would or wouldn't kind of take that approach?
Yeah, so in terms of team appreciation, it's a really nice exercise, by the way. So you literally show everyone the 24 strengths and ask everyone to choose one strength for their colleagues, each of their colleagues, their team, that they value about them with an example. Now, what happens, as you'll know, with feedback is often we just chuck it out in a really quick way. Look, oh, you're really, of course you do that, Martin, you're really kind. And we just chuck feedback out in a really quick way. So what we're talking about is saying, I chose this strength for you because of this, because of what I've seen about you. And you're giving a very rich example with it that lands with us. We then truly believe that. And what happens is our top strengths then start to expand, which is, wow, you noticed me. You noticed when I did that favor for you last week, so much so that you brought back that example. You noticed when I work for you. You notice what I do for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, kind of, it feels very real, doesn't it? That kind of activity. It's kind of, sometimes there's a danger that when we're assessing other people or evaluating them in a way that we kind of rationalize everything, and it can become a little bit too detached from reality. But what you're describing there is very much kind of a real world experience that people believe when they hear.
Yeah, it's really grounded in reality, and it also kind of teaches people to get better with feedback.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that when we give feedback, we often don't base it on fact and evidence. We just trot out something subjective. So when you say to someone, I really, you're just so funny and playful, and we don't ground it in evidence. But when we say, at that meeting last week, when you actually brought that exercise in that lightened the atmosphere and enabled us then to all contribute, you are doing something, you're teaching people to get their feedback grounded in evidence. The other thing, though, is I think adults crave positive appreciation. They might not say it, but it doesn't leave us from children. We still really want to know that people value us.
Yeah.
That's why it works so much. I have seen adults weep over that exercise.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because most people feel underappreciated, don't they? And the sad reality, I think, I can't remember the details of the research now, but I know that there's certainly a clear indication that in many cases they're not underappreciated. It's just that it hasn't been communicated.
Exactly right. Or we take it for granted. We go, oh, look, I'm always saying how great they are. I'm always saying thanks. And that's what I mean, is we're grounding in evidence.
Mm. Do you ever have to do any work to help people accept that kind of feedback?
Sure. I think, I think that's often, certainly it's a British sensation, which is we brush off compliments. So we go, oh, of course I am. Yeah. Or we negate it, going, well, only with you. So we brush it off and we negate it. So learning just to say thank you and accepting it is an art in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. But something worth persisting with. So, well, thank you. Were there other examples that you wanted to mention right now, or should we ask anyone else if they have other questions?
No, I'll ask anyone. I think
so. If anyone has a question, I mean, maybe what we should do, just while you're contemplating your question and framing it into sort of an eloquent form of words, either to go into the chat or to unmute yourself in a moment. But while you're thinking about that, I will just give you a quick overview of Deckhives for those of you who haven't seen it before. We have other sessions that we run that give you a fuller introduction, so please do sign up for one of those if you'd like to know a bit more. We have a 30-minute introduction to Deckhive session, which we run every couple of weeks, and we also have some longer tutorial sessions. So if you are already slightly familiar with the platform and want to come and have a play and ask any questions and those kind of things, then there are some of those sessions too. So on our Eventbrite page, you'll find that. So we'll include details of that in the follow-up email for those of you who are here live today, and there'll be details in the text bit of the YouTube video for those watching on the recording. But essentially what we have in Deckhive is a way to use, as you've seen, using cards on screen. So although we lose to some extent that tactile element that many of us love about working with real cards, we do retain a lot of the benefits of that visual stimulus, about the ability to drag cards around on screen, flip them over, and so on. And so we also have, as you've seen in here, different options for different tables, so that we can allow either different activities to be on different tables, so there's different space to work in, or to have different people working in different spaces. So although we could have many of us in this same session together, so I've just been sharing my screen today, but I could have invited Lucy, Steve, and any of you here in to join us in this session in a real-time a shared session, so that anybody in this or everybody in the session can move cards around and be part of that interactive experience. So just as you would be if you all stood around a real table with a deck of Lucy's cards on the table in front of you, Deckhive works in that same way. So anybody who's in the session can simply move the cards around, select them, turn them over, and so on. So it makes it a truly collaborative experience. We have a growing library of decks. I think we've got about 20 decks in our library at the moment, and there are more in the pipeline on the way too. So our hope is that you'll then find the deck that is most helpful for you and the clients that you're working with in that particular moment. So certainly an opportunity to have a play and to explore different decks of cards and find your way around. So that's the aim of the platform. And we've really just created this out of the lockdown experience because we wanted to help people to continue to use the kind of tools that they've loved using face-to-face for the last few years when they're having to work in a virtual environment. But actually, I think in some contexts, even face-to-face, it can be useful to do this on screen. So if you don't have a deck of cards to hand if you are if you have an account on Deckhive, then you always have that resource available that you can whip out your deck of cards on screen and use them in that way if need be. So as I say, other sessions you can sign up for to find out a bit more about Deckhive. But for now, do we have any other questions coming? I haven't been keeping my eyes on the chat, Lucy.
Oh, there's one from Sam. Shall I just read out the actual question,
Please, yeah.
Martin, if that helps? So Sam says she already uses the VIA assessment, and one of the things that she often finds is that clients muddle values and strengths. She does quite a bit of values work as her start point. Any thoughts on this? Sam, it's a great question, and I really remember asking this about 10 years ago, and no one kind of giving me a clear answer until I went to one seminar. And sadly, I can't remember, I can't even credit who gave me this answer that suddenly made so much sense. And what they said, Sam, was that values are like an ethereal wish list. And their words just stayed, they're kind of up here, they're like an ethereal wish list. Talents we're born with, skills we develop at work, and character strengths are your route path for making all of those a reality. And
that's beautiful.
I'm glad you think so. And I have used it ever since, Sam. So if you're working with values first, terrific.
Yeah.
But you'll know that values can sometimes just feel quite intangible. And so I then start with that too and use the character strengths as the route path for making it happen, for making them tangible.
So you said about the values being the wish list, ethereal, talent being what you're born with.
But we might not necessarily love or want to use.
Yeah.
Skills we often develop at work.
Yeah.
And character strengths are our route path for making all of it.
I like this, the route path. Fabulous. Thanks, Lucy.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. No one else has ever answered that question for me. Well done.
Delighted to help.
But if there are no more questions at the moment, then I guess we should wrap up. But are there other things that you wanted to mention, Lucy? Well, your book, I should ask you about a bit more because you talked about that earlier. So I've seen the cover, which looks fabulous. So can you tell us a bit more about what it's about and when it's available?
It's called Lunchtime Learning for Leaders. I wrote it in lockdown 1 because I didn't know what else to do because all our training work had gone. And I was starting to write 2,000-word essays on LinkedIn for leaders and then realized, this could be really cool. So it's based on 16 biggest topics that have come to my leadership coaching door over the last kind of 15 years. And tackles each one of them in a practical how-to way. And it's out on October the 3rd, and I've just had all the early endorsements in, which have been really just so cool and energizing.
Excellent. So have you gone out to some big names to kind of get...
I tried.
And you can share with us?
No,
Robert,
really big ones didn't answer me.
Yeah. They'll regret it.
Yeah, they'll be there.
Excellent. Okay, so we can look out for that. So how will we find out about that and get the reminder? So can we find you on
Learning for Leaders? It's on Amazon for pre-order now.
Okay, lovely.
And it will be on my other website, which is lucyryan.co.uk from next week, and then obviously in all good bookshops from October.
Excellent. And we can follow you on LinkedIn, I'm sure, as well, to sort of see the news on that.
Lovely. Thank you, Martin, for asking.
So you'll be shipping to Australia?
Oh, Ben, it'll be there by the shed load.
Yeah, good. I'll make sure that I'll get a copy as well.
My sister's there, Ben, in Australia, so I'll ship a crate across to her.
Excellent. Well, no, thanks again, Lucy, for for joining us, and for Steve for lurking in the background. And was there anything you wanted to jump in with, Steve? Anything that we've missed that we should have mentioned?
I think you've been very thorough. Well done. I really enjoyed it, so thank you.
Well, I'm sure it's stuff you've heard many times before, over many lunchtime conversations. But yeah, thanks for both of you for being here, and thanks for everyone else.
Pleasure, Martin. Thank you for hosting it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And yes, and as we said at the beginning, the recording will be available hopefully within the next 24 hours. For those of you who've not managed to stick around or missed a bit of the content and want to recap, then that's available for you very soon, along with all of our previous recordings. I think we've got something like 7 or 8 of them now about various different decks in the library. So if you're curious about any of the other decks that we have and want to know a bit more about the basis on which they were created and by whom they were created, then please go and check out some of those other videos. So I hope to see you again at one of our future sessions. I think we're taking a break for a few weeks over the summer holidays, but we'll be back again with more in September. So hope to see you again on a future session. But thanks again, Lucy.
My pleasure.